To do exactly what you're doing at the moment and stay behind those lovely blue ropes. The space between the blue ropes is our bird safe area, so where they know they can fly around without anyone coming running towards them. Now we will bring them as close to you as possible, so try your best not to shake the ropes either, because obviously this will scare our birds and we don't want them getting scared. Then when they get near you, please do not try and reach out and touch them. Even us keepers don't touch them in that way, so if you're reaching out towards them, they're going to think you're doing something nasty to them, and therefore they'll defend themselves. So we want this to be as enjoyable for them as it is for you. Now the first bird coming out is basically going to play a game with our keeper Amy. She's going to put him on the top rock, and his name is Icarus, and then we're going to try and get him to do some of his natural hunting abilities. Now to do this, what we do is we swing around a device called a lure. Just basically a leather pad with a tiny bit of food on it, attached to a leather rope. Now basically what this does is, because Icarus's natural diet is things like pigeon, quails and doves. Now for anyone that can't recognise Icarus, and don't worry, I wouldn't expect you to, he is a lanner falcon. So lanner falcons come from the Mediterranean and throughout Asia. So they'll live reasonably high up in the mountains, about 5,000 metres above sea level, and they'll either fly around like this, or they'll hover, or indeed just sit on the cliff edge and wait for their food to come past. Then what they do is they come down in what's called a dive, just like this. It's called a stoop actually. And basically what they'll do is they'll either ball their feet up and punch their food out the way, or they'll grab it in their lovely sharp talons, depending on the size of the prey and whether they manage to catch it or not. And as I say, this is a game, and if Icarus never won, he'll probably get quite bored. And then he's got two choices. He can either go sit in a tree and wait for us to call him in, or he can go find his own fun. Now he is a fantastic hunter, and I say let him win, but more times than not, Icarus will actually catch us out. Now we do believe he enjoys playing this game because he actually flies different for each of us three keepers that fly him. So he'll fly a lot harder and a lot faster for one of our other keepers who's been working with him for a lot longer than he does for me, who's relatively new to flying with him. Now, as I say, he is a Mediterranean species, but we do have 4 species of falcon here in the UK. We have the hobby, the merlin, the kestrel and the peregrine falcon. Now, the kestrel is the one you're most likely to have seen along the edge of motorways. Basically, they like to eat mice, voles and shrews, so those small rodents that you'll find in the long grassland of the verge. And they'll basically just hover there and then come pouncing down on it. Now the peregrine falcon you can actually now find in towns and cities around Gothic buildings, because they like to eat pigeons and quails and doves much like Icarus does. So they come down in their stoop at over 200 miles an hour, and then they'll eat all those lovely pigeons that us humans start to think of a pest. Now if you look at Icarus here, he's not doing this because he's out of breath. Don't take me wrong, it does take a lot of energy to fly around like that, but what he's doing is something called mantling. Basically, he's got his wings out like a mantelpiece or an umbrella, so no other predator above him can actually see how much food he's got under him. Therefore, there's no point coming down and competing for it. Then what he's also doing is looking around. Whilst he's in the air, he's one of the top predators, but once he reaches the floor, he's actually very vulnerable. Even a domestic cat or dog could take him. So he needs to make sure that nothing's going to come along and take him. And obviously at this point, he's got several options. If it's a small amount of food and a land-based predator, he can fly off of it to a nice safe place to be able to eat it in his own peace. Or if it's a large piece of food or an air-based predator that might take him, he can leave it behind, which means that that predator will hopefully eat that food instead of chasing him. Now he does have incredibly sharp talons, and that actually just pinches right behind the back of the neck, or he'll use the tooth on the end of his beak to dispatch his prey very, very quickly. So he's not going to suffer at all. Now as I say, you will find these throughout the Mediterranean, and you'll generally only find them hunting alone. The only time you'll see them in pairs is when a mother's teaching her chick how to hunt. Now when they do this, basically mum will make her nest on the cliff edge, and it's literally just a little scrape. It has very few twigs or leaves or anything like that in it, and that way she can sit up there on the eggs and then on the chick and be able to see her prey coming underneath, so she doesn't need to leave them for very long. And then as soon as her chicks actually learn how to hunt and learn how to do that nice fast stoop and catch it in its nice sharp talons, she'll actually get rid of that chick. So it'll move on and it'll find its own little territory. Now you may have heard there as that Icarus went back to Amy's glove, he actually has a tiny little bell on his ankle. And that basically just gives us keeper a bit of advantage. Especially as you can see, she's got her sunglasses on here as Amy. And that's because Icarus uses every single environmental condition to his advantage. So when he first came out, he would have assessed the wind, seen which way that was blowing, which was the fastest way to come in at Amy. And then he'll also fly in with the sun behind him. So that actually blinds us keepers. So by giving a bell on his ankle, it means we can hear where he is. Now, though that sounds like we're cheating slightly, he does have a very sharp beak, comes in at a lot of force. So we need to know exactly where he is so we don't injure ourselves. Then on top of that, he's got a couple of bits of leather and what we call equipment attached to his ankles. And there's also a tiny little wire hanging off his ankle. Now this is what we call telemetry. Basically it's a little radio tracker, so if he decides to fly off or he gets caught by the wind, it's not a problem at all. We can get out an aerial, which basically sends out a little bing, and that tells us where our birds are. And we put it on every single one of our birds of prey before we bring them out. So that's what I'm doing at the moment. I'm putting on to the next bird of prey. And then of course we'll find out exactly where our birds are, go out, stand underneath them with a piece of food and call them back down to us. So obviously we don't starve our birds. They just come back to us because we've got this nice good relationship with them. Now after that fantastic foreign bird, I'm moving to one of the British ones. So this is Bucky, our British barn owl. So as the name describes, she can be found here in Britain. So, and obviously being a barn owl, you naturally find them in barns. So barns, disused buildings, anything that's got a nice little hollow in it for them to live in. Now unfortunately this is where us humans are causing them some problems. We're firming up all these buildings, all the disused buildings and barns, to make them into houses. So unfortunately we're taking their homes away to make our own. Now, shere's the British barn owls, and you can actually find barn owls around, all the way around the world on every single continent apart from Antarctica. Now, they do all look slightly different. So you'll notice that Bucky here, her back actually blends in very nicely with the sandiness of this really dry grass. So that means it makes it a bit harder for her prey to see her. But if you look at her lovely white belly, you'll notice that it does stand out quite a lot. And that's because obviously here in the UK, it's normally quite cloudy. And barn owls are what's known as crepuscular. So what this means is they're basically awake during dusk and dawn, so the really low light conditions. So that white belly actually reflects the moonlight, so they just won't be able to see them in that moonlight. Now you'll notice as Bucky's flying around, she's absolutely silent. There's no sound whatsoever. You may have heard as Icarus flew around, you can hear his wings beating. But you can't with a barn owl, and that gives them that nice silent flight. Now to be able to get this, unfortunately they've lost their waterproofing. So unfortunately they can't go out if it's even drizzling. So them flying during the day like this isn't too unusual. They would do this if it's been wet during the normal flying hours. Now as a rule of thumb, you can actually tell what time an owl's awake by looking at their eyes. So if you look at Bucky's eyes here, you'll see they're lovely and black. But if you go down the woodland walk and look at our great grey owl down there, you will notice that she actually has bright yellow eyes. And because she's what's known as diurnal, so she's awake during the daylight hours, so she has much smaller pupils to allow less light in than the barn owls like Bucky here do. Now they do have binocular vision, and it's actually quite similar to us. But what they actually use to be able to find their food is their hearing. So they've got what's called asymmetrical hearing. So one ear is actually higher than the other, and this basically means they can pinpoint where a heartbeat's come from, where their prey's heartbeat's coming from to be precise. You'll also notice, looking at her face, she actually looks like she's got a satellite dish in her face, or she's been smacked in the face by a frying pan. And this basically just channels the sound back. So it all gets caught in this satellite dish for her face and then channeled back to her ears. You'll also notice that she actually spends the whole time looking around, and turning her whole head. And that's because she can't actually move her ears or indeed her eyes. So what she does is she'll turn her whole head to pinpoint exactly where it is. Now obviously a lot of people believe that owls can turn their head 360 degrees round. They can't. If they did that, their head would fall off. but what they can do is turn their head 270 degrees round, and that just allows them to pinpoint exactly where it is, because they can hear the heartbeat of a mouse over 14 feet away. Then they'll fly over, they'll actually hover above it to pinpoint exactly where it is, and then they'll pounce down with their lovely sharp talons and grab onto their prey. It takes a lot of energy to fly around, especially when you weigh just under 300 grams like Bucky does here. So they want to try and maximise the most amount of kills and the maximum amount of food they get. Now I'm sure you'll agree Bucky's done a fantastic job at completing the flying part of our display, but this isn't the end of our bird display today. But for the next species of bird, I'm going to pass you over to my colleague Amy to tell you all about them.
Well, thank you, Anne. So the next set of birds are going to be doing some walking, and of course it is our colony of Humboldt penguins. So if you take a look over to the right-hand side of the arena, you'll shortly see the penguins coming out to do their parade. Now, can I please reiterate, it's very important you do stay your side of the rope barrier for the whole time that the penguins are out, and please don't try and touch or stroke any of them. They do have some sharp beaks that they won't be afraid to use, and we don't want you to go home with any injuries. Again, if the penguins do join you on your side of the rope barrier, don't worry, we'll shortly shuffle them back in the right direction. Just give them plenty of space, and before you know it, they'll be back in the arena with the rest of the colony. So like I said, this is the Humboldt penguin, which is one of 18 different species of penguin you can find living out there in the world. Now, you find all penguins living in the southern hemisphere, so no penguins living on the North Pole with the polar bears. The most northerly penguin is actually found right on the equator in the Galapagos Islands. Likewise, you don't find them all living in Antarctica. Only really the emperors, the kings and the Adelie penguins that solely depend on colder regions. So it might be a case that if you see those particular species being held in captivity, they're either kept in inside areas that can be kept cold, or they're kept up in Scotland, in particular with the king penguins, because their temperature is much cooler. Now, the Humboldt penguins are found in South America, along the western coast, down the coastline of Chile and Peru. So even though it's relatively warm on the land, in the water it's relatively cool due to something called the Humboldt current. Now, this body of water comes up from Antarctica and brings with it cool, nutrient-rich water with lots of food. Now, the penguins are classed as a medium-sized penguin, so they like to eat small shoaling fish, things like sprats, herrings and anchovies. They will also take small crustaceans and squid as well. Now, they do have some predators in the water. Things like sea lions, seals, whales and sharks will try and take a penguin as prey. But they do actually have an element of camouflage. If you've ever noticed, all penguins are actually mainly black and white. So they have a black back, and this is to give them camouflage against the dark seabed. And then they have a white front, and that gives them camouflage from the sunlight coming through the water. But if you're looking at their chests, you'll notice that they do have speckles on them, and these are unique to each penguin. So you can actually use them as a way of IDing the penguins. Now, it's one of the ways that some collections will use in the zoo. We do tend to have a universal way throughout collections, and that is a microchip. So if we do move penguins to other collections, that microchip will be used as an ID method, because not every zoo is going to keep the same names, for instance. So all of our penguins do have names, and they do have coloured bands on the flippers. Normally all of our penguins would have them, but at the moment we've taken the majority off because they have just done their annual molt. But it does tell us the individual from a distance. So for instance, you might be able to see Ziggy out on the arena. He's got the red band on his right flipper, and his partner Waddles has the red band on her left flipper. Now, I say that they're a partner, and they have been together for a number of years. It is true that penguins do partner up for life, and they're very good parents. They actually have 2 breeding seasons in a year, one during the spring, the other one towards the end of the autumn. They can lay up to 2 eggs in those breeding seasons, and the parents will take it in turns to incubate the eggs for around 40 days. They will then take it in turns to keep the chicks warm and to provide food. So they will have to go into the ocean. They fill up a crop, which is just an area above the stomach, up with fish. It can only fit so much in, so they can't overeat. They then go back to the nesting site and they regurgitate to the chick. So this is very highly nutritious. The chicks put on a lot of weight in a very short period of time, and it means that they do bulk up very, very quickly. They start off at about 75 grams when they first hatch, and within about 2 weeks they're the same size as the adults. But the penguins have done a lovely job to conclude our bird display this afternoon. They're going to get fed the rest of their food by our penguin encounter experience today. But once that door is shut behind them, we'll drop both the rope barriers, reopen the penguins and the flamingos so you can head back inside and have a look at them. And at 12:25 will be the feeding and training of our Californian sea lions. So I do hope to see you there. But